Hey, Jason here, creator of Flowpack Pro, and today I just wanted to walk through a new action that recently rolled out called Detect Language, and it does exactly what it sounds like it does. So it'll take some text and attempt to determine what language that text is, and it's using some AI in the background to determine that. So let's jump into a quick little demo. And this is a really simple flow, and I've got a few sort of template languages here I can drop into this input, and I'll hit the next button, and we can see that that language was Spanish. If we go back, we'll just try a couple different ones. This one is, as I'm sure we all know, French. And the last one here, copy this value, put it in, see what we get, and it's Persian. So how did this work? Let's take a look at the flow behind the scenes, and here it is. So it is a screen flow, very simple. There's actually only 3 steps to it. The first screen, let me make myself a little bit smaller here, is one input. So this is just a hard-coded text field here for demo purposes, but the field we actually care about is this input text, and it's just called language input. The next step in this flow is calling the detect language action. So this is the component that's from the Flowpack Pro application. So we open this up, and it's really simple. We just take that value from the input, pass it into this action, and we get the identified language as an output. So the final screen is the language output screen. So if we open this up, you can see it's just a display text again, but we are referencing the detect language action that we invoked, and that actually returns multiple properties. One of them is the language itself, which is the full English name, which you saw in the demo, and then the ISO code for that language as well. So both those data points are available. So at a high level, this is the overview of the detect language action, and all sorts of cool ways you could use this in a flow. In a screen flow like this, maybe you want to decide what path to go down based upon a language selection, or if someone types in a free form text field and you want to attempt to identify the person's location or what next screen to show, this is a great action for that. So as you can see here, it can be used in screen flows. But we're going to go a little bit deeper. And the next demo or kind of guide will be using this to set the language on a record when it is created. So let's jump into that. So before we get into the details of how exactly this will work, I'm going to jump into setup and just go over some of the configuration that I set up ahead of time. So we have, excuse me, go to Object Manager. We're going to do this on the case object, very common for cases to need to know the language. And so I just created a field called language. Here it is, it's a pick list. It's very simple. And yeah, it has 3 values. And so one thing to note on this, which is kind of important, is I did not check this box saying restrict pick list values to the values defined in the value set. Reason being, we may have 3 or 4 really common languages that we expect to see, but if we're capturing a free-form input from a user, we could get any language, and we wouldn't want that insert of a record to fail if it didn't match a existing language. Or maybe we would. That's up for you to decide. But if we go back to the documentation, we can see the list of supported languages is quite long. So we can either make that pick list match every single value here, or we can just kind of limit it to the languages we think are the most applicable to our business, but then allow additional languages into that field should that language be identified in the business process or the flow that you've created. Okay, so this is the field on the case. The next thing I want to look at is actually the case assignment rules. So the situation we're solving for is we want a case to come in, we want to identify the language, and we want to route it to a specific queue of individuals that speak different languages. So if we look at the case assignment rules, open this up. It's pretty simple to begin with. I know most people's real world applications are much more complex, but straightforward in the sense that if the language is Spanish on the case, we will assign it to the Spanish support queue. And if it's either English or blank, the language, we will assign it to the English support queue. And these queues are something I set up ahead of time before I started making this kind of walkthrough. Okay, so that's kind of the background, how the system is set up. So how do we make this a reality of when a case comes in, identify the language, and assign it to the correct support queue? Let's jump right into it and build a flow live. So we'll go to flows. This is going to be a new flow, and this is going to be a record trigger flow. So we want this to fire as soon as a record is inserted. Patiently wait for Salesforce to load. And the object we want this to run on is a case, and we only want it to run when it's created. And for the sake of best practices, let's only run this if the language field is blank or null or an empty string. And one thing that I'm going to sort of cheat and check ahead of time here is this run asynchronous path. And we'll explain why when we get kind of deeper into building the flow. So I'll check this box and I'll say done. All right, so there are two branches here. There is the run immediately branch and the run asynchronous branch. So the first thing we need to do essentially is detect the language, right? So if we search for the actions here, we can search for detect language. There it is. And we'll just call this detect language. And the value we want to pass in is the record that we're processing and the description text. We could use the subject if we wanted to. In this case, we'll just use description. Done. And I'm actually going to save this right now. And we'll say this should be called, let's see, set language and run assignment rules. So we'll save it. And we're actually going to get a warning here as soon as we did that. And what it says is the detect language action needs to be removed from or move it to a scheduled path because a record triggered flow cannot execute actions that make external callouts in a path that runs immediately. And what's important to note is this action will actually send the information to a third-party language service to identify the language and send the result back. And we never store the language or log it anywhere, so the data that's sent is never persisted anywhere. But the reason this is important is imagine if you were trying to insert a case, this was running immediately, it was calling out to a third-party server, and maybe that server wasn't responding quickly. If Salesforce allowed this, it would actually make the insert of a record feel really, really slow. Or what if that server was down for maintenance? Should the insert of the case record fail? I mean, that's not really Salesforce's fault if a different server's down. So why should they be penalized for an error that shows up in Salesforce when it's actually a different platform having an issue? And so for that reason, Salesforce says if you are going to be calling out to any external services, you need to put that action in an asynchronous workflow, which just means it runs in the background. And upon an insert of a record, it'll actually run usually within a second or two after that record's created. So it's very quickly after the record is created, but in an asynchronous fashion. So the first thing we can do is just use the great little cut feature here and move this to the asynchronous part of the transaction. And when we save this, the error or the warning should go away. And it's gone. Okay, great. So the next thing we need to do is update the record that's being inserted with the language. And so we'll use a little shortcut here and we'll say, yeah, we'll call it update record. And we are going to set the language field on that record to the output of the detect language action. And there it is. So that looks good. We'll save this. I'm going to save this flow. I'm going to activate it. And let's go create a case and see what happens. Cases, new, and thankfully I have Google Translate here ready to go with some demo Spanish text. The product is not working. I need some help. And so let's go to a case. We'll say this should be Spanish case. And we'll put that value in the description field. We'll say this is from email. And let's go ahead and save this and see if it worked. So at first you'll see language is blank, which is expected because remember that flow kind of runs in the background 1 or 2 seconds later. So if I refresh this, hopefully the language is Spanish, and it is, which you can see here. Okay, so that's great. So we were able to set the language on this case to Spanish quickly after insert happened. But you can see the owner is still this generic user record. So how do we assign this to the right queue? So let's go back to the flow and make that fix. So one thing you'll notice is in the update record action that Salesforce provides, there's no way to run assignment rules. And if you search for actions, there is also no way to run assignment rules for cases. You can see there's one here for leads, but not for cases. And so how do we solve this problem? Well, the application, FlowPack Pro, the one I'm talking about right now, actually includes a mechanism to run assignment rules on a record update. So we need to tweak this ever so slightly. So we're going to get rid of this update records action, delete this, and we will create a new assignment. So we'll just say set language field. And in the record we're processing, as it is being inserted, we want to set the language field to the output of the detect language action, which there it is. So now we've set it. And so instead of using the regular Salesforce update action, there is a action in the FlowPack Pro application called Update Records Advanced. And it lets you do all sorts of additional advanced functionality upon the update of a record. So we'll just call this update case. And this is kind of an annoying thing we have to do in Salesforce is like define what record types we're currently working with, or excuse me, what record object, not record type that we're working with. We'll say case, case, case. And then it shows all the inputs. And what we want to do is say, okay, what record are we updating? In this case, it's going to be the record case. And then we want to check this box called Run Default Assignment Rules. So that's it. We say update the record. Oh, and we do need to pass in true to this argument. Say done. Let's save this as a new version. Activate it. And let's go create another case and see if this will work. So I'm going to go to cases. We'll create another case and we'll call this one Spanish queue with a question mark, meaning hopefully this works. We'll take the same value, paste it in the description, fill in the required fields. We'll save it. And again, immediately the language field is blank and the case owner hasn't been filled in because again, that flow is running in an asynchronous background fashion. And if I reload this page, hopefully, if everything worked right, we can see that the case owner now is the Spanish support queue and the language has been set to Spanish. So with that, kind of an overview of the detect language action, but also some real world use cases of how you could use it. So appreciate it. Thanks for making it to the end of this video. And if you have any feedback or ideas of how to improve the app, please send them my direction. All right, thank you. Bye.